Hello and good afternoon. My name is Kit Cabello. I'm one of the co-hosts of Hard Lens Media. You can listen to Hard Lens Media every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time on Q4 Radio, 1680 a.m. You can also find out more about Hard Lens Media on our website, hardlensmedia.com. Today, we're joined here with a very special guest, Ruth Needleman. She's an activist, community organizer, and we last spoke to Ruth at a important protest earlier this summer. It was in regards to the deportations at the Gary Chicago International Airport, and we are very honored and privileged to have her at our studio. So first and foremost, for our viewing audience, can you please introduce yourself and give us the background to who you are?
My name is Ruth Needleman. I am not retired. I teach a class right now at the School of the Art Institute on global social movements every spring, but I have a long history of activism. I was active in the Harvard strike back in 1968, and then I was active with the farm workers when I was working at UC Santa Cruz. We were part of helping to picket the fields and organize the boycott, and then I went to Chile when Allende was president, because I was just dying to know what a peaceful road to socialism looked like. And I learned more than I ever bargained for. And when I came back, I quit my job and went to work for Cesar Chavez. And then I quit that job because of the coup in Chile. I was too upset, came back east to New York to write something on the coup. And then I ended up organizing in a factory.
Now, it's quite clear. Let's actually focus on a little bit on South America, because you had a long experience in South America as regards to activism and actually covering the history of it. And when corporate media talks about socialism and democratic socialism, they bring up the previous governments that were socialist in South America, and they say that they led to dictatorships, that they were failures. But you were there during their creation as well as their overthrow. What is corporate media really getting wrong in regards to talking about the history of South America and its role with socialist and democratic socialist movements?
I would have to say they're getting just about everything wrong. When I went to Chile in 1972, Allende was president. He had been elected in 1970, even though the United States, that was Nixon and Kissinger, had tried repeatedly to prevent him from coming to office. And then they did everything in their power to overthrow him. But what I saw there was an extraordinary popular mobilization and an incredible sense of empowerment of the people. I'll just give a couple examples. The factories were obviously run like ours until Allende came to power, and then he nationalized all the major multinationals. At the top of the list were Kennecott, Anaconda, the big copper companies. And under Allende, those corporations, those mining endeavors were all controlled by the workers themselves. And the unions played an incredible role in carrying out that leadership role, making sure they had production, because Chile depended completely on copper for foreign reserves, not unlike Venezuela today, depending on oil, or Brazil having depended on oil. These are important questions because the U.S. has so much control over global capital that they can bring down a government through the global marketplace. So the first thing they did with Allende, besides killing his general and trying to prevent him from taking power, was carry out an economic boycott that meant that spare parts could not get to Chile, which means buses, cars, everything. They also gave an enormous amount of money to the right wing that were mobilizing, but when the right wing pulled together what was called the October strike, some people thought it was a union strike. It was actually an entrepreneurial association strike. The word was gremio. And these were led by the National Association of Manufacturers, the National Agricultural Society, those kinds of organizations. And I got to know them because I volunteered to help the National Publishing House put out a chronology and study of the right-wing groups. So, naive and silly as I was back then, I went and interviewed the leaders of the right wing, and they were fascists. I was unbelievably shocked, although I guess I'm very good at lying because they thought I must be CIA. I said, look, I'm a professor from UC Santa Cruz. I'm very sympathetic to your plight. And they shared things with me, and everything they told me I wrote down when I got home and gave over to the Popular Unity government. One of the things they told me was they were actually relieved that Allende had come to power because now they knew every single person that they wanted to kill. And what's important about that is that they meant it. They did not want to just overthrow Allende. They wanted to eliminate every remnant of social movements in the country. This, of course, is kind of similar to our government's approach in those countries, because to defend the corporations, you want to eliminate all the people who would protest against exploitation. But when they pulled off this massive strike, which shut down, they called it a trucker strike. It was truck owners. And it shut down all the distribution of materials and food. The workers came to the forefront. They took over distribution. They formed these community distribution networks. They took over public transportation to use for distribution, and not just took over control of their factory. They built something that was called the Industrial Strip Coordinating Committee. So representatives of every factory on each industrial strip came together for defense of the factories controlled by the workers. They did this in neighborhoods. They did this in squatter settlements. And what I realized when I was there is that I really hadn't understood class consciousness. Class consciousness is talked about a lot, but we don't see it very often. And when I first saw it was listening to a woman on a crowded bus. There were no spare parts. As a matter of fact, they were using Volkswagen buses as buses. I couldn't even stand up straight in these little buses. But I got onto this bus, and I hear this voice in the back of the bus. Compañero, you don't know anything. You are so stupid. You don't know your own interests. And she starts to explain the imperialist economic boycott, the lack of spare parts, the lack of foreign reserves. They cut off all loans from the IMF, the World Bank, the Inter-American Bank, and of course, AID. So that basically they were trying to starve out this government. But she explained to this man who was sitting back there complaining that this is imperialism at work. And what you have to understand is the only way to deal with this is for us to organize and fight for our own rights. And they were doing it everywhere in Chile. But I also saw this in other countries. I saw it in Brazil. I was there for the second election of Lula, Ignacio Silva, who is in jail now waiting to run for president, but the U.S. is making sure he's in jail. In fact, the person who put him there studied for a year with the Department of Justice in this country on how to use corruption to overthrow. They're doing it in Argentina right now. And so all of these countries responded to military dictatorships put in by the U.S. by creating these broad-based social movements that put in left-leaning governments. It happened in one country after another: Bolivia, Ecuador, Argentina, Brazil, even Chile elected a woman president who was the daughter of a military man who had opposed the junta. So anyhow, and what they did, in fact, was to make sure that land was redistributed, that people got a minimum wage that was decent, enabled them to live, that people had housing. These squatter settlements became these huge housing settlements with clinics, with schools, and the people loved Allende. And a matter of fact, and this relates to Venezuela today, when Allende was when the midterm elections for the Congress were up in April of 1973, the right wing was convinced that they would get sufficient votes to impeach Allende. Allende increased his percentage of the vote. In Venezuela, just a few months ago, when there were elections, oh, help me, I'm forgetting names, Maduro increased his percentage of the vote. So what we hear about Venezuela is that it's this horrible dictatorship. Now, I say conditions are horrible in Venezuela, but there's an economic boycott. We flooded the market with oil to bring down the price of oil, which is what Venezuela depends on. And then we cut off all aid. We did the same thing we had done in Chile. No loans of any kind. The IMF, the World Bank, all cut Venezuela off. And all the companies stopped producing. And so, yes, the hardships are unspeakable.
But they wouldn't exist if the U.S. had not commandeered it. And now, if you look at Latin America, there are now right-wing governments in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Chile. It's kind of turning back the clock, and they're still using the same game plan. That's what gets me crazy going, because they first cut off all the aid, except for to the military, but they can't give aid to the Venezuelan military because Chavez came out of the military and it supports the government. So they cut off all the aid. They make it impossible for people to get access to food. They create the inflation by manipulating the markets. And then everybody blames the government, and instead of understanding the pressure that still, I guess we could call it, U.S. imperialism brings to bear when they want to overthrow a government. Cuba was a thorn in the side of the United States. When they set up the Alliance for Progress in 1961 or 62, its main goal was to prevent another Cuba. So when Allende gets elected in 1970, they are domino effect crazy. It's just like Vietnam. And so I believe what Kissinger said at the time was, why should we let some two-bit country put into office somebody that doesn't support us? In other words, we don't recognize democratic elections if they're anti-US. And so it's a replay that's going on every day in Latin America today, again. And they use different, instead of military dictatorships, they're actually using right-wing congresses, because it's very hard for the people to elect and get into office, a majority of Congress people or parliamentary people. And they use that to make it impossible for the president to govern. That's why Maduro, a couple of years ago, or was it last year, decided to have another vote for a new Congress, a people's Congress, because he learned from what happened in Chile. Because what the Congress did in Chile was veto everything that was on Allende's agenda. They removed everybody in his cabinet with no reason, and they made it impossible for him to govern. And he brought in military to the government to try and kind of conciliate the right wing, which of course, I mean, he brought Pinochet right into his government as the head of the military. But anyhow.
So this is an example of, I guess, the U.S. involvement in South America, and the result of this has led to upheaval. The policy of the ridiculous drug war has caused an increase of crime and the cartels to run unaccounted for, and also in some cases civil war. And because of these factors, and also economic instability, and all these factors added together, it causes people to migrate and get away from the area to come to this country here.
Absolutely.
But the result is when they come to this country, they're just treated just as inhumanely as they were in their own home country. And I know that your organization right now is combating a private prison in Indiana, or that's tried numerous times to set up a private prison so that immigrant families could be sent there and being held. and at the same time, too, there is the Gary-Chicago International Airport,
That's right.
where it deports immigrants who live in Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Kentucky. And they do this every Friday in the morning, afternoon, just to deport them en masse. So I think for our viewers, let's actually get a little bit of a background history of the Gary-Chicago International Airport, this private prison that has been trying to build this 800-bed facility. And let's get back on those two areas, and finally Chicago's influence with those two areas as well.
That's a lot of questions.
I know it's a lot, but it's important for a lot of people to know.
That's right. So the private prison companies, there have been what are called RFPs that go out and say we need more prisons, and of course they increased them under Obama, although he put a few blocks in against private prisons. Those blocks have been removed by Trump. And they need to build larger prisons to be able to do larger deportations. And so they tried to build, I think they started in Crete and Joliet, and the people ran them out of town. And a lot of this was coordinated from the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. They deserve a ton of credit. Then they showed up in Hobart, Indiana, and we got the mayor. I mean, the mayor was against it, but then again, they do this thing about it means jobs and money, which it really doesn't, because prisons don't hire that many people. And to work in a prison, you can have debts, you can't have a prison record, you can't have any family members who've been in prison, and what do they think our area has? So we ran them out of Hobart, they came to Gary. And they really liked the location because they were going to build right across from the airport. So we stopped them dead in their tracks. And lo and behold, 3 months later, they reappear. It was like trying to squash down something that just somewhere else. And we defeated them again. And in that struggle, we learned, which I should have known before, but I learned that they had been using the Gary Airport for deportations. They had been bringing people from Broadview, Illinois, to Gary on Fridays to deport them. It had started somewhere around 2014. Before that, they had been shipped out of O'Hare and also local airports in Illinois. But what made this possible is a compact that was signed in 1995 by the mayor of Gary, Thomas Barnes, neither smart nor, I don't know what to call him. He just went along with it. It was Richard Daley who played the game. The governor of Illinois wanted O'Hare to be taken away from the city of Chicago so they could have control over and get the money from it. What Richard Daley thought out was, if we make this an interstate consortium with Midway, O'Hare, and Gary, then the governor can't touch it. And so in 1995, they signed a pact that said that the Gary-Chicago International Airport could only serve as a reliever for Midway and O'Hare. And by reliever, they meant, we do the money-making things, you get the garbage jobs. And what that led to was using our airport for deportations. And what they do, there's an airplane that comes in from Brownsville, Texas. It's called World Atlantic. We've looked it up a million times, can't find out much about it. World Atlantic has a contract with ICE. And World Atlantic has a contract with the Jet Center on the airport property.
And the Jet Center actually now officially built 2 new hangars.
2 new hangars, and Will Davis, the private owner, so try and get information about the Jet Center is not easy. Now, he was against the prison because he wants more corporate jets too, and he didn't think a prison would help with that. But he has been getting all this money from the deportations, and we can't get the information because he's private. And so I've put in about 10 FOIA requests. The first one got answered, and it said, as of April 2017, 19,501 people were deported from the Gary airport. And deportations there started in 2014. That's a lot of people per year. What, 9,000 per year? And so the Gary airport does the deportations every Friday morning. The plane comes from Brownsville at about 9:30, 10:30. The buses from Kankakee now pull in. These buses make your blood run cold. They're painted completely white, including the windows are covered in white, so that people can't look out or in. And the people inside those buses are shackled hand to foot. And they are brought in and loaded into this airplane that will take them back to Brownsville, and they will be pushed over the border, whether they live anywhere near northern Mexico or not. They just push them over. And we have learned from a fabulous fighter, Sister Joanne Persh. She has been interviewing these people since, I don't know when, maybe 12 years. And she has met with virtually every single person on those buses. And she meets with their families, first at Broadview, now in Kankakee, and says there are no criminals on these buses. She said the worst crime that she has found talking to these people is shoplifting or driving without a license. The vast majority are guilty of wanting to be with their families and coming back here without papers. And so these people are treated like hard criminals. And this guy was very recent. He was a veteran from the Afghanistan war. He had served twice in Afghanistan. And when he came back, he got arrested for drugs. Since most people coming back suffer from PTSD and are on drugs, he got arrested. When he got out of jail, he had been told if he joins the military, it's a path to citizenship. The minute he stepped out of jail, they arrested him and took him to Broadview. He got deported out of Gary, and his mother told us that at the airport, all the guards and the ICE people were ridiculing him, taking selfies with him, that it was vicious and cruel. And then they dropped him over the border without money and without clothes. His mother had tried to bring those things, and they would not let her give them to him. So, and the gangs in northern Mexico are on the lookout for veterans because they say, you join our gang or we kill you. Because they want people who know how to do military such things. So it's just so oppressive all the way around. And what we realized over time is that these deportations don't just take people from Broadview and Illinois. It's the whole Chicago area and Illinois, but they bring people down from Milwaukee and Wisconsin during the week, put them in Kankakee, and also load them onto the buses. So this is a multi-state operation, and thousands of people are being shipped out of here every week for the crime of wanting to be with their family, wanting to have a decent life, wanting to escape poverty, gangs, violence.
No, I think it's very important to note that people need to understand what's been the response of the local authorities towards your protest. Because when we were first there, what happened was they had an area where they were going to put you guys in. But then all the organizers, yourself included, were saying, we're not going to just be in this one spot. We're going to go where we're always going to go. But we did notice that there was a police presence. But on our show, on Q4 Radio, you did state that they would come there heavily armed and in mass. So what were some of the interactions that your organization had, your fellow allies had, with the police force that was there at the Gary Chicago International Airport?
Our first demonstration was, I think, April 7th, 2017. And we were small but spirited. You know that expression. We talk about that all the time. And we could see the buses. We could see people getting out of the buses into the airplanes. And we were protesting. And as we got a little bigger, and then when we got the support of Jobs with Justice from Chicago, they got scared. And so we had a demonstration of 300 people with Chicago people included. They brought in county sheriff, state sheriff, local police, SWAT teams. I mean, there were so many police there, they might have outnumbered us. And they were all heavily armed. So I took a bunch of pictures. And we took those pictures. They did it twice. And that's when they started to corral us, kettle us, into the parking lot. We used to stand out by the street where at least we could see something. Then we were put in this little space. Now, we haven't gotten out of the parking lot because they will not let us. They block it. But after we went to city council and said, hey, Gary is a welcoming city. We worked very hard to get that ordinance just this past year. And they're not supposed to provide any kind of help to ICE because that is commandeering local police forces and it's a violation of the Constitution, 10th Amendment. But nonetheless, we were surrounded by heavily armed cops. And so when we showed these pictures at city council members turned to the mayor and said, what is going on here? And she said, oh, well, this will never happen again. This will never happen again. We've told them to dress in civilian clothes. But what happened after that, the very next time we demonstrated, I told the head of the airport, which I usually do because they used to keep the doors open so we could use their bathrooms, that we would be protesting. The night before the protest, I get an email saying, oh, by the way, there will be no buses tomorrow. Ever since that time, anytime we go to protest, at the last minute, they shift the buses to O'Hare away from Gary.
And it's very important to note that when myself and my partner Daniel with Heartlands Media, when we covered your protests, the buses did not come.
That's right.
But you had somebody who was following the buses, and apparently they were rerouted to O'Hare Airport. And this is quite clearly an issue that everyone should be concerned about.
Yes.
But I know we have just a few short minutes left. So I know our viewing audience definitely wants to know, one, where they can find out more about your website, where can they find you on social media, and where they can go to volunteer to help you guys out.
And we do need help. So first of all, we have a Facebook page under NWI Resist. This is an umbrella organization formed right after Trump got elected. And we have focused on this issue of deportations. And we have a Facebook page, we have a web page. Mm-hmm. And I just learned we have an Instagram.
Yeah, thanks to our wonderful
That's right.
Social media director.
We also have been trying to collect money for a billboard. This airport is in the middle of nowhere. And nobody can see us when we're there. And if the buses don't come, it's very hard to get anybody out. So we started collecting money for a billboard.
And all that information can be found on your website, correct?
Yes. Well, I'm hoping the GoFundMe page,
okay,
NWI Resist, this is for the billboard. We are also having a program September 11th that you can find. Right. And we will be having a meeting September 15th.
All right. Thank you so much, Ruth. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but it's very so much.
Okay.
We're very glad to definitely do a follow-up interview with you. Peace, everyone, and let's all do what we can to build a better future.
Thank you.
You're watching Hard Lens Media.